This episode is brought to you by Capital One Cafe. Today, we're filming at the Capital One Cafe near Herald Square in New York City. I'm sipping an espresso martini shakerado, non-alcoholic, and if you want to try any free handcrafted beverage at a Capital One Cafe, you can get one using the link in the description below. It's on us. And thanks again to Capital One Cafe for sponsoring this episode. You're listening to the 2 Cents Podcast. I'm Hannah Williams.
And I'm James Daniels.
And today we have a very special guest, Manhattan-based psychiatrist, researcher, award-winning content creator, and now an author of her book, High Functioning, Dr. Judith Joseph. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me. I'm so excited to be here with you all in person.
Definitely.
Same.
Thanks for making time for us after the Today Show.
Thank you.
How was that? How was it being in that studio?
Well, it was actually a prep call for my parents, and it was pretty intense. But in the morning, I saw patients, did research, had a bunch of meetings, and then that was the last one, then came here.
Wow. Very busy day.
Very busy, very high functioning AF.
That blows my mind because you're a full-time psychiatrist. Like, you have clients, you see them throughout the day, you have that job, and then you're a content creator. I'm a full-time content creator and I couldn't do that. How do you do that? That's amazing.
You have to have a team because I do research, and when you come to my lab, you'll see that I have like 3 lab spaces and a full team. I have doctors, nurses, clinical research coordinators, office managers.
Wow.
I mean, I can't do it without them.
Wow.
And that's why I'm able to do all these wonderful things like teaching at NYU, where I've taught a course for over 10 years to doctors, teaching them how to talk to the press and writing content. I also have a team that helps me to get the content videoed, edited, and all that stuff. I just can't. There's no way. And I'm a mom. I could not do it all. And wrote a book. Like,
you wrote a book.
You need a team. Like, really. And honestly, anyone who
village.
says they do it on their own, they're not telling the truth.
Well, props to you, because that just blows my mind, and it shows how amazing you are and how privileged we are to have you on the podcast. I'd love to know, to start off, for anybody who's listening who maybe is interested in becoming a psychiatrist themselves, how did you get into psychiatry? Did you always know that that was your path?
So yeah, I didn't always know I wanted to be a psychiatrist. In fact, when I was little, I wanted to be a scientist and a doctor. Went to Duke, studied biology, chemistry, and religion because my dad's a pastor. So I had this whole existential crisis, like faith versus science. You don't have to choose. You can choose both.
Right.
Yeah.
And ended up going to medical school at Columbia, which is a very surgical school. Like a lot of people who Columbia produces as doctors, they end up going into like operating room fields.
Okay.
So even though I was interested in psychiatry, there's this whole dynamic in medicine where people who are psychiatrists aren't seen as real doctors, even to other doctors.
Yeah.
And so I ended up choosing anesthesiology, which is a very lucrative field.
I was going to say,
Yeah.
I
Super
know
lucrative.
this pays so
Yeah,
well.
I
I've
know that
interviewed
one.
people making so much money. Why'd you change?
When I was chasing the values that others wanted for me, like my family being the first college graduate in my family, the first doctor in my family, they were like, go for the money, right?
Right.
So I wasn't really going for what was my true calling, which is speaking with people, helping people, working with patients over years, not just seeing them for one encounter in the OR and never seeing them again. But I was chasing what everyone else thought I should be doing. And when I matched into this very prestigious program at Columbia, people were like, oh my gosh, you're so lucky. Like, you're going to be set for life. But I found myself really lonely in the operating room. I like to talk to people. I like to be around people. So you don't really get to interact on that level. So
You're not talking about your feelings.
you're definitely not asking people how they're doing because they're under. If you're doing a good job,
Right.
they shouldn't be talking
You're
back,
doing a
right?
good job.
Right.
So I found myself feeling really empty and something called Anhedonia, which is what I study today, a lack of interest and pleasure. You're just going through the motions. On the outside, you may look great, but on the inside, you're not enjoying life. You're not getting the most out of life.
Wow.
And I was speaking with my friends who were actually psychiatry residents at the time, and they were like, oh my gosh, you loved your psychiatry rotation. You loved this experience in South Africa when you were talking with children who were orphans and who lost their parents to HIV and AIDS, and they broke down to you. You talked about your scarcity trauma. They talked about theirs. Why don't you become a psychiatrist? And I was like, why didn't I think of that? But I had already matched. And when you're young, you think once you pick a path, that's it.
Yeah, you can't change.
And people tell you not to change.
Right.
In conservative fields like medicine, it is frowned upon. You're seen as a failure. If you say you don't want to do it, you're seen as weak or vulnerable. But I made this very difficult decision to say, I'm not happy. I'm not fulfilled. I'm leaving. And so scary at the time. My parents are Caribbean. They were like, why you want to work with crazy people all day? And I was like, well, they're not crazy. We all have mental health issues. We just don't acknowledge it, you know? And my, the people who were my mentors and allies in the hospital were saying, well, just stick through it. No one's happy. And I'm like, I don't know about that.
Right.
So I ended up switching and I never looked back. I'm so grateful.
Glad for that.
Yeah. And it takes so many years to, 3 years in this field and 3 years there. So I give you so much props for the courage it took to make that change, because I know a lot of people who wouldn't have done the same.
I know a lot of people who are still in their fields in medicine and they're just like, you're so brave. I wish I left. Now I'm stuck. It's never too late. 4 years of undergrad, 4 years of med school, 2 years of a residency. And I still was like, I'm going to pivot, which meant more school. But in the end, when you think about 4 or 5 years in the grand scheme of life, it's nothing.
Right.
Yeah.
So you always have a choice.
Yeah. If anybody is listening and is in a similar place where they are in deep in their career and they want to make the change, what advice would you give to them to give them the courage to make the switch?
Listen to your gut. If you're feeling stuck, if you're feeling unfulfilled, your body's telling you that. There's only one you, ever. There's only ever going to be one James, one Hannah, one Judith, ever. Think about how powerful that is. So you are here for a reason. This is the only body you'll ever have. If it's telling you something, if your mind is telling you something, don't gaslight yourself. Listen to it. It is there to protect you. That's number one. And number two, lean on people who believe in you no matter what. If someone's just, with you because of what you are, your role, how prestigious or good you look, then they're not going to be with you when things are difficult, when the difficult decisions come your way, when you are lost, when you're not the rock, right? Even the rocks need a rock.
Yes.
The rocks need pebbles, if they're not as equally of a rock as you are, you still need your pebbles around you.
You got to lay somewhere.
Yes.
I love that.
And then number three, failure is an idea. It's a concept, just like happiness is a concept. So don't let ideas and concepts hold you back. If I were to stay in that mindset of I'm a failure, then first of all, it wasn't even true. Like no one would ever think a graduate of Duke with honors who got into medical school, who left a field that they didn't love was a failure. But sometimes we get caught up in our heads and we let these labels and words define us. So failure is within the eye of the beholder. So, you leaving a position that you're unhappy with may be actually a success because you're chasing something that does eventually make you happier.
That was fantastic. Thank you so much for sharing. And I guess I'd love to know more now that you're in psychiatry. How long have you been doing this? And looking back, how has that journey been?
So I've been a practicing psychiatrist after residency for a little over 10 years.
Okay.
But I always include residency because it is part of your journey.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
After you finish medical school, you do residency in whatever field. And so you're learning with co-residents, with peers. And I would tell you that my residency, I'm still friends with my co-residents.
Love that.
And it's interesting because I was the only one coming from a surgical field to what I thought at the time was like all these soft psychiatrists. And when I look back, one of my favorite movies is Good Will Hunting, where where Matt Damon, he's like, when Robin Williams is like, it's not your fault. It's not your fault. He's like, I know, man. I was like the Matt Damon in the group because I was like, oh, you guys are all soft. Like, you have a good life.
Boston in you.
I was like, you don't have to take these hard calls where people are dying. Like, why are you complaining? And they were like, Judith, like, we're just processing our emotions. Like, talking about how you feel is not complaining. And it was like, oh.
Right.
So every week we'd have this thing called process group where the psychiatrists in training would sit around a table and like talk about their feelings. And there was this like head psychiatrist who would be like the group facilitator. And we'd talk about things that bothered us, like things we saw in our training, things we saw with our patients, things within ourselves, and we bring it to the table and process it. And they gave us all the option of being in therapy with like some of the most prestigious psychoanalysts in the city.
Wow.
So I would like walk in with my my, busted book bag and like into this fancy Upper East Side therapy office where this, you'd sit next to people who are like dripping in diamonds and you'd be like the poor broke resident getting this world-class treatment with these great minds. And initially I was like, again, I was like the Matt Damon. I was like, what does this guy know about me? I'm from Trinidad. I grew up in an urban setting. He's rich. I grew up really poor. Like, he won't figure me out. And boy, was I wrong. Like, people don't have to be from your similar backgrounds to connect with you, to help you. So understand your own biases when you walk into a situation. Don't let people, don't figure people out.
Yeah.
Give them a chance in the way. And I realized I was projecting. So I was projecting because I thought he was trying to figure me out, and he didn't know where I was coming from. But I ended up projecting onto him and assuming things about him. But he was a very helpful therapist, although he was like different background, different culture, way older than me, but he was effective.
Let's get into some transparency now.
Yeah. So you know that a lot of our channel is based on paid transparency. With you coming from the anesthesia field now into psychiatry, what does pay look like? We've done interviews with anesthesiologists who are making, buku money.
Yes.
Buku.
So you made that jump. What does the pay look like in general?
I'm telling you, anesthesiologists are rolling. They're rolling in it. They may not say it, but wow. And that's where I think a lot of the resentment in the operating room comes from. Like, a lot of the surgeons don't like the anesthesiologist because a surgeon they're staying there late at night. Once you operate on a patient, you sometimes have to stay and check on them. Their work doesn't end with the operating room.
Okay.
The anesthesiologists, typically, they get relieved, not all the time, but they get relieved by a nurse anesthetist and they get to go home and they're done. And the billing is so high for anesthesiology. Sometimes when you look at the procedures, the anesthesia procedure is paid higher or reimbursed higher than the surgical procedure.
Wow.
So for my parents to see like, wait, you're going to go from this field where you're making millions a year to possibly, because most psychiatrists on average are making right now probably like 200 to 300 a year, depending on what part of the country you're in. There are going to be outliers there, but typically, it's like a drastic difference in salary pay. So you're doing it because you love it.
Yeah, because we've interviewed a nurse anesthetist. I think she was making $300,000, and then an anesthesiology assistant who was making like $150,000, and it's crazy. I'm sure you had interesting conversations with your parents. If people are listening and have similar experiences where their family maybe doesn't support the career change they want to make or the career they chose, period, how have you found courage with yourself with that choice? And what advice would you share with anyone listening who's in a similar boat?
Yeah, well, let me clarify, because like anesthesiologists, they keep you alive.
Right.
If you think about it, a surgeon, when they cut you open, if a surgeon were to cut you open without an anesthesiologist present, you would die.
Right.
You would bleed out within minutes and you would die. So think about the complexity. A surgeon has like all of these technicians and other surgeons aiding them in this whole process of cutting you open to do whatever they need to do. An anesthesiologist is typically on their own, and they're putting a tube in to make sure that you can breathe. They're essentially taking over your physiological function. So they're allowing you to breathe, for your heart to beat. They paralyze you so you don't move. They sedate your brain so you don't remember. I mean, there's so much going on.
Don't go wrong.
That's why they get paid so much. The risk is so high. And I always say in anesthesia, 90% of it is like easy peasy, like you're just doing your job. The 10%, when that person is like literally life or death, that is so scary. You are there literally, everything is going on. Once you're calculating the dosages to put in, you're calculating their breaths, you're doing so much math. So like kudos to them. And I have a lot of friends in the field.
Kudos.
And it's such a lonely field. It's so stressful that, I see where the pay comes in. So, and I say that because not everything's about money. So like, imagine that amount of stress and the unknowing, like, is this going to be a day where it's 90% easy peasy or 10% where I'm like literally squeezing blood into a person? I mean, for me personally, no amount of money was worth that. Like, I love the peace of mind of knowing, okay, my patient's coming in. I may not know whether or not they'll be feeling better, but I know they're not going to be leaving, on death's door, right? So I do think not everything is about the money in that case. And when I explained that to my parent, they were like, oh, okay, maybe I see what you're talking about. But
Yeah.
still, pick something else, you know? I think the stigma was so high with Caribbean parents. You know, it's not like in the Caribbean we talk about mental health the way we do in other countries, I think, or areas of the world. I think that's changing. But I do think it's important to have a discussion, let people know what you're thinking, why you're making these changes versus, I don't like it, I don't feel fulfilled, let me leave. And then your parents are just like, or your family's like, well, I don't understand your train of thought. Like, help us understand.
Mm-hmm.
So you have to be able to express that to people who are supporting you, or else they just feel like you're making erratic or, you know, not well thought through decisions.
Right. If you don't communicate, that's not
Yes,
fair,
it's
right? You
not.
have to tell them the reasoning behind it,
Yeah.
which I love what you said. Money isn't everything, because that is a hot take on this podcast in the best way.
Yeah.
Because I do agree with you. Money isn't everything. We started doing this page and we didn't make money for 6 to 7
for about a
months.
good 6 months.
And that was okay with us because we believed in our mission and we loved what we were doing. We were happy to quit the rat race to do a creative project for ourselves. So I really align with that frame of mind, even though money is kind of everything for our work. But I think you bring such a unique perspective, and it's why we wanted to bring you in today, because I want to learn more from you about the impact money has on our psychology, because I can see this rat race, you know, of people chasing money can have such detrimental effects on our physical, our mental health. What is your experience and what can you share as a psychiatrist, a true expert in this? How does money impact our psychology?
Well, financial stress is one of the number one stressors right now, right? It's like
Mhm.
literally on top of people's mind. You need to meet your basic needs. So that's why money is important. It's not everything, but it is important, you know?
Mhm.
And there's something called scarcity trauma, which, you know, I talk about heavily on my page. If you've come from a position where you didn't have resources growing up, or your parents didn't, or maybe generations before you didn't, those behaviors, that trauma can pass on to you if not processed.
Mm.
For example, if your grandparents didn't have resources or they went to bed hungry often, they may have started hoarding things like old food, and then maybe you can't get rid of food, right? Or they may hoard things like clothing that has holes in it that you'll never wear, and then you start doing that. Or, you know, it could show up in other ways. You don't take risks because you don't ever want to be in a position where you can't have resources. So you don't invest in yourself. So you stay in the same job, in the same situation, or with a person in a relationship where it's unhealthy, but you don't want to ever be in, you know, need again. So you rely on their finances, or you're afraid to leave because of that. There are many differences. And also, some people have an unfamiliar relationship with abundance. So when they have a lot of resources, it feels unfamiliar, uncomfortable for them. So they'd rather spend, and be back in a place of debt because that feels familiar for them. So there are many ways that, you know, scarcity trauma, financial anxiety can play out.
Yeah.
From the standpoint of picking the right job, you know, you may not want to leave a job, even if you know it's not good for you, even if it's toxic and the people treat you poorly, or they don't respect your boundaries, or it's causing you physical health issues because you're afraid that, you know, maybe you won't get a job, or you need the health insurance, or, you know, you're worried about how it looks to other employers, or for whatever reason. But those emotional and psychological factors play a role in your behaviors and your decisions.
Yeah.
So it is important to think about the way that money impacts your psychology and your emotional well-being.
Mm-hmm.
But it also, two things can be true. It's also not everything. It's also not the most important thing.
Yeah. And so on the flip there, James and I are married. We would love to hear your 2 cents on how money impacts relationships. We know it's, I think, the number one reason for divorce. What advice would you share to couples on how to navigate the stressors of finances, or maybe the joys of it too?
Well, ideally, talk about it before you get married. That's what,
Mhm.
you know, every therapist will tell you. Try to have these discussions before.
Mhm.
And, you know, talk about things like, how do you save? Do you save? Do you invest? Why don't you invest? You know, how
Mhm.
do you invest? Because there's many ways to invest.
Mhm.
What's your comfort level with in terms of like what is in the bank? Because for some, again, if you've come from very little and you're comfortable with like 1,000 in the bank versus coming from more resources where you're more comfortable when you have 100,000 in the bank,
Mhm.
that's very different.
Yes.
But if you don't talk about it, which many people don't, then you're coming at it from different perspectives without truly being able to empathize with each other.
Yeah.
So definitely try and talk about it as much beforehand. Also, like, who's going to work? Are you both going to work? Who's going to stay home? Are you both going to do something at home? Are you going to have businesses? These are all important decisions. Does one budget? Does one not budget? Again, because money is a source of anxiety, you want to try and decrease as much anxiety in the relationship as possible. Because when people are anxious, they are not as intimate, they're not as present with each other, or they fight more, or they don't want to be around each other. So you want to think about all the factors that play into anxiety and try to control or contain or minimize as much as possible.
I love that. I have one question that I want to interject here. Is it okay if I give you a scenario and what you would say, to a client presenting that scenario? Okay, so I have a scenario for you. Say James makes a really big purchase without telling me. I know you wouldn't. We're really good at that.
I was going to say, are you trying to bring something up? This isn't the time to discuss this.
We're very good about communicating with one another. But if somebody listening is in a situation like this where their partner makes a big purchase without consulting them, what advice would you share to them on how they can talk about that and come to even ground?
Whenever there are quote unquote secrets, first, I want to know whether or not this was truly a secret. Was this something that the person did because they were hiding it, or were they just like absent-minded, or they didn't think it was a big deal? I have a lot of people who I treat who are neurodivergent, and a lot of times they thought they said something, or they thought they had informed the partner about a purchase, but they didn't. And it was just like literally part of the neurodivergent picture, like thinking they did something, but they didn't,
It can be innocent.
Innocent, just like, a part of forgetfulness, or a lack of planning. But in other cases, there's intentional hiding. And there's a term called gaslighting that gets thrown around so frequently. Gaslighting is not the same as lying. And I see this a lot. Like, oh, you were gaslighting me. Like, you didn't tell me. It's like, lying is not the same.
Right.
Gaslighting is when you intentionally try to change someone's version of reality. It's almost like, literally the term came from I think it was a husband telling a wife the light's not on when it was on, and or the light was off.
I didn't know that. That's cool.
From the gas lamps. I learned that in psychiatry.
Cool.
But like, you're literally changing someone's version of reality and making them go crazy. And it's manipulative, it's mean, and it's cruel. Lying is not. Lying is people lie because they don't want to get in trouble. They're afraid of what you'll think. They don't want to be rejected. So if it was lying, then, okay, well, why did you lie? Well, I was afraid that you'd be mad, or I made a decision and I couldn't return it and that we're stuck with it and I feel ashamed, right? That's very different. So I want to understand, which one was it? Was it a lie? Now, gaslighting is different. You're intentionally being cruel. In that case, that's a whole other issue. And you probably shouldn't even be with that person, but if someone is lying, it could be for many different reasons. So I want to have a clear understanding as to what was the mindset. And let's say they were lying. Let's say, they wanted something, but they knew you would say no. Then that tells me that, okay, there's a communication issue. One person doesn't understand the other's needs or wants or visions. And so are you in this together? Because a lot of times you're in a relationship on the outside, but you're not really in it together. So like, the cheesy analogy of being in a boat. Are you in a boat going in the same direction, or is one paddling one way and the other paddling the other way? And a lot of times people are in relationships and they don't have the same goals, but they like the way that they look together, and attachment is real. Like, once you're in a relationship, it's really hard to leave, because you become so attached biologically, biochemistry wise. Like, literally, when that person enters the room, your biochemistry changes. Like, your body reacts to them. So it's really difficult to break away once you're in a relationship. So people sometimes stay in these situations and they lie to each other because they're already so attached, and it's hard to break away. Which
is why you need to talk about these things early. So one more question then related to your work, but what reasons do people come see you related to work? What stressors are they experiencing in the workplace, in their careers? What are some common things that you see?
The most common thing I see is anhedonia. And anhedonia is a lack of interest and pleasure in things that once gave you joy. And I know it doesn't sound like an emergency, but people come in and they're having like an existential crisis. And they're like, Dr. Judith, on the outside, I have nothing to complain about. I have a job, I have a family, or nothing's going, like, there's no real crisis, but like, I just kind of feel meh. I feel blah. I feel stuck. And they're like, help me with that. And I say, that's anhedonia. And they're like, what? Anna what?
Anna, what?
I'm like, yeah, it's actually a scientific term that's been around for over 100 years,
Wow.
but most people don't know about it. And when you give people the name, it's so powerful. It's almost like if they were in a dark room and something fell and they're like swinging, they're like, what is that? They're running for the door and you turn the light on and they see it's like, oh, like a glass fell. No big deal. That's how they feel when I tell them anhedonia is what they're experiencing. They're like, oh, so it's not just me. Like, people experience this. This is a thing, you know? There's less blame because they feel guilt. Like, well, what do I have to be, you know, complaining for? What, like, I have so much, you know? But when they know that anhedonia happens when you're not being present, when you're busy, when you're running from trauma and not processing it, when you're not living a life as a human being, you're a human doing, right? That adds to anhedonia. And then knowing what it is means that there are ways to cope with it and there are ways to address it. But that's usually why people come to me. There's no crisis per se. I mean, I do have patients who do, but the majority of people are coming with anhedonia.
Yeah, there's no fire, but they smell smoke.
Yes.
There's something is making them uncomfortable. And I'm sure you'll get into this in the book, but can you give us a Spark Notes version of what next steps people can take if they feel like they're struggling with this?
Well, you know, again, it's because they're likely busy or pathologically productive and not really living life. And I simplify it in my lab. I have a happiness lab where I ask people to hold their hand up and like think about it. Like, we were born with the DNA for joy, but we can't access it for some reason. We've forgotten how to access it. And when you look at a child, because I treat children as well as adults, if you look at a toddler, you don't have to teach a toddler joy. Like, you give them a box, they'll play with it. You know, they'll roll around, they'll eat crap off the ground and be like, having the time of their lives. But adults, we sometimes like we're at parties and we just can't even talk to people. We're so tense. You know, we're eating our food, but we're not tasting it. We're just like shoving it in. We're sleeping. We may get 7 hours, but we don't feel rested when we wake up. So like the basic human pleasures are just lost and people feel stuck and meh. And I give them this framework called the 5 V's that I developed in my lab. Number 1 is validation. Accept how you feel and acknowledge it no matter what. If it's good or bad, accept it. Many of us are just like, oh, I'm fine, you. But no, like, start practicing saying how you really feel. Like, oh, I'm tired. I'm burnt out. I'm depressed. I'm exhausted. Like, the good and the bad. I'm excited, you know, anxious. And then number 2 is venting. Like, express it in ways that feel authentic. So many of my clients are neurodivergent. They're not very verbal. So I'll say, write it down. Or, you know, listen to a song and sing a song that expresses how you feel. Or, you know, move, dance, or pray if you're someone who's spiritual or faith-based. Cry. You know, people don't take advantage of that one enough. And then the 3rd is values. These are the things that are priceless, not with price tags. So your family, your faith, you know, when you're on your deathbed, the things where you're like, I wish I had 5 more minutes of that. You're not going to be like, I wish I got like another degree. You're going to say, I wish I saw that sunset. Or like, I had my favorite pizza. Like, that was like so good, you know? And then the 4th is vitals. These are the things, because there's only one you, only one me. Take care of your body. So the typical traditional vitals are sleep, nutrition, movement. And I talk about ways to do that in the book. But also the non-traditional ones, like your relationship with people. That's like the number 1 predictor of your longevity. So your relationships matter. If you're like around toxic friends, they are draining your life force. If you're around healthy friends, they're adding to it, you know. Your relationship with technology, which is a new one because doctors aren't asking about that yet. They will. I guarantee you, in 10 years, it's going to be on every health screening. And your relationship with work, which high functioning people typically have an unhealthy relationship with that. And then the 5th is vision. How do you keep moving forward and planning joy and celebrating your wins? Because many of us don't, and there's nothing to keep us moving forward. So we get stuck in the past. And a simple planning joy is like, okay, after I interview with you both, later today I'm going to get my nails done because they are grown out. Like, like something small.
Yeah.
Or, when I get my kid to school on time, I always sit in my living room and I sip my coffee, like my rum flavored coffee from the Caribbean. I'm very snooty with my coffees. And I'll drink it slowly and not have a screen. Like I'm drinking my coffee in peace and I'm tasting the notes of like the delicious sugarcane rum in it. It's not alcohol, by the way. It's rum flavored. I don't drink in the morning. But like these are the things that I invest in. I used to just like do my regular like generic coffee in the morning. But now like the things that I savor, I truly savor. And I'm not going to like cloud them with other things. These are the simple wins, right? So I don't recommend tapping into the 5 V's all at once. Pick one or two.
Yeah.
And it's a reframe. Like when patients come to my private practice, they're like, oh, I want to be happy. But in my research practice, I'm like, no. You're thinking about it all differently. You want to get points of joy. Joy is the experience. So drinking your coffee in peace, taking a rest in between meetings, drinking water when you're thirsty. Those are all the points of joy that make up happiness. Versus I just want to be happy. Happy is an idea, an ideal. May never happen for some people. But points of joy, getting those and tapping into those daily, that's how you become happier. So it's a huge reframe, subtle, but so powerful and so attainable. Everyone can get a point. You gamify joy, but not everyone will be happy, that idea, that ideal that we're chasing.
Wow, that was so well said. And I can't wait to dig into your book because I know there's so many good nuggets in there that really add on to what you said. Thank you for sharing.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah, really great advice. And honestly, I'll be taking a lot of those 5 V's to heart.
Yeah.
I can definitely see us practicing it at home. My question for you, you have the 5 V's. We have you sitting here, Dr. Judith. What can the people who are listening, who let's say they don't have the financial means to see a psychiatrist, what recommendation would you give them?
James, I'm glad you asked that because that's why I wrote this book. Because after I mentioned I was teaching at NYU, and a lot of the doctors after 2020, because the course used to be in person, then it went online, then it went back in person, and they were like, we don't need to know how to give press interviews anymore. We need to know how to create social content. That's where all the patients are getting information. So I started creating this content online to teach.
Which is amazing, by the way. I love your videos.
Thank you.
I had to ask. I'm obsessed.
Well, I had to teach the doctors how to do it, and that's why I started doing it because
Love it.
I literally didn't know how to do it. And I did not expect it to go viral. I didn't think people would care about anhedonia. Like in medicine, it's like it's such a medical term, but people could not get enough of it, And so, I thought, okay, well, let me figure out other ways to get information out there because in some parts of the country, there's only one psychiatrist for every 30,000 people. I can barely handle 30 patients, right? And so the book was really that method. My podcast is one, but really the book is making people have access to tools as if they were in, a session. It's still not replacing your treatment, but it gives you the tools. And my book starts off with understand the science of your happiness. Again, there's going to only be one James, Hannah, Judith ever. Like so powerful. So why are we using tools that we don't even know work for us? If you don't understand the science of what's making you unhappy, how do you know the science of your happiness? And so I put tools in there like the biopsychosocial model, which is anyone can do it. It's taught in medical school. But I wanted to democratize that information and make it available for everyone. So in the book, I teach you how to do your own biopsychosocial.
Cool.
So you understand the biological factors that weigh you down, the psychological factors that you may have, and the social factors. So, for example, I use myself often. Biologically, I have low thyroid. So I have to be careful because that could put me at risk for depression and anxiety. Whereas someone else may have like an autoimmune condition. Psychologically, I have my own past trauma. I talked about my scarcity trauma. Someone else may have another type of trauma, like a relationship trauma, and then a different attachment style. Social-wise, I live in a big city. I'm a single mom. I have businesses. I don't really drink that much. Maybe occasionally I don't smoke. But someone else may engage in like, a lot of substance use, or they live in a country setting. Who knows what their social factors look like, their relationships. So we all have our own biopsychosocial, because we're all humans, but our components look very different. So our science is so unique, right?
Wow.
Because there's only one us. So I start off with that. And then once you understand the science of your happiness, then you can use the tools and apply it where you need it the most.
Wow. The science of our happiness. I need to get started on this book. This is so exciting to me. Thank you so much for sharing all of this with us. I don't know about everybody listening, but I got some really great nuggets from speaking with you. So thank you so much for being open and transparent with us.
Oh, thank you for having me. I love talking about the science of happiness.
Oh, well, thanks for talking about it
Thank
with
you so
us.
much. We really appreciate it.
Where can people buy your book? When does it come out? And where can people find you so that they can continue to follow you and learn more?
So my book comes out on April 8th, and you can buy it anywhere the books are sold. My socials, Dr. Judith Joseph, everywhere, except for Facebook. It's like it's like Dr. Judith Joseph, MD, MBA. I think that was like really old.
1, 2, 3.
Yeah. But don't sleep on Facebook. It's been growing.
Yeah.
And yeah, please support my work, support my mission. And you can take the Anhedonia quiz. It's free. And, my trauma quiz, all of those things are on there. Again, I wanted to make these tools accessible to everyone.
Wow.
So.
I love that. We'll tag all of that below in the description. Thank you so much again.
Thank you for having me.
Thanks again for listening to this episode. Don't forget, you can redeem a free handcrafted beverage at any Capital One cafe using the link in the description below. We'll see you next week. Bye.